Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming out on a chilly Florida evening to talk about a dry subject like underground utilities. When I look out in the audience, I see a lot of friendly faces that have either come up to me at public meetings or have reached out to me by telephone and asked, how can we bury the utility lines in our neighborhood? Or they may have heard that it was being contemplated in their neighborhood and they wanted more information about it. Cost, disruption, and all of those sort of things. And so it's good to see all of you, and I want to start by saying thank you to the Civic Association for putting on this event to help us have contact with you and to answer any questions that you may have about the subject matter. The most important part of this process tonight is the question and answer session, because I can't possibly answer or hit upon every question that each of you have in your mind. So it's intended to be informal and for you to ask any questions that you feel need to be answered about the subject matter. With me tonight is our team. It's not me and me only that makes undergrounding happen in Palm Beach. It's a group of staff members and consultants that help us make it happen. In the room tonight is Paul Brazil, the Director of Public Works. He oversees the Public Works Department and the construction process. He has here as well the new town engineer, Bill Francis, who's in charge of the construction process. Chuck Langley is the senior projects engineer, and he's worked directly on all of the projects, I believe, to date. And our consultants are Danny Brannon from Brannon and Gillespie, and Maziar Keshevars, who's president of Keshevars and Associates, and one of his engineers, Alan Green, who work with me to make all of this happen. What I thought I would do tonight, or this evening, is to give you an overview of how we got to where we are today, so you'll know the history of underground utilities in Palm Beach, and then I'm going to try to explain to you where we'd like to go with it at this point. The first time that underground utilities was taken seriously in Palm Beach was the year 2003. The mayor and town council at that time said they wanted staff to analyze the feasibility of converting the entire town to underground utilities. So we went out and hired a consulting engineer that was in that business, and we did a study, and it came back with a staff report and that study, and it said that the undergrounding would be, if I remember correctly, about $75 million to do the entire town. And so slowly but surely, as we discussed the subject, it went from the front burner of our responsibilities to the back burner because the cost was very surprising to the elected officials. But then, in 2004, what happened in September? Hurricanes. And there were people probably in this room who lost power for up to 3 weeks. No power. I see hands being raised right now, which is miserable in Florida and maybe anywhere else. But suddenly it went from the back burner to the front burner, and we got serious about it. And the town council instructed staff, and me in particular, to go out and reach out to other municipalities in Florida to see if they wanted to form a consortium to work with FPL and the other utilities throughout the state, and go to the Florida Public Service Commission to get the rules changed to facilitate underground utility conversions. We ended up having about 60 cities in total work with us in what was called the Municipal Underground Utilities Consortium, and we were successful to a large degree. FP&L changed their tariffs. The Public Service Commission urged them to do so, and among the different things that were done are a 25% discount for underground utility projects if you meet certain criteria. For example, we recently completed the Everglades Island conversion to underground, they received the 25% discount because they are an island. But usually you have to have at least 3 miles of underground utilities to get the 25% discount. So we did that, and we proceeded towards updating the cost estimates, and then the price actually ballooned to over $100 million. When we got into the weeds and the details, it was over $100 million. And one of the problems was that we proceeded to pay for it through a general obligation bond. The general obligation bond, to cut to the chase, means that the taxpayer, if it's approved in a referendum of the taxpayers and the voters, you pay based upon the value of your property in a general obligation bond. Now, the downside to that we discovered through the meetings and so forth with the citizens was, I'll never forget, there was a surgeon, I can't remember his name, but he lived on the ocean front, and he was complaining that it was unfair to him to have to pay based upon the value of his property. So I went to the numbers and dug into the details, and I discovered he was right, that when you ran the numbers based on the value of your property, he would have paid over $300,000 in 30 years of a bond issue for undergrounding. So for that, and the fact that the town council realized at that time they had the need to do other bond issues to deal with infrastructure problems, it was decided we would not do the whole town at one time. We would do it on a neighborhood approach. And we would not do it based upon the value of your property. We would do it by special assessment. And when we do it by special assessment, if you have a home of 10,000 square feet, let's say that's on the water, and it's a home of 10,000 square feet that's in the middle of the island, the cost to provide them with underground service is no different. So they all pay the same based upon the methodology that we use for establishing the assessment for the different properties through town. Just to digress for a moment, the assessment is based on 3 benefits that occur by virtue of underground utilities. The 3 primary benefits are safety, reliability, and aesthetics. Most people are just interested in the aesthetics, to be honest about it. But safety and reliability is part of it too. And when you study the methodology, the larger your land parcel is, the more you typically pay. If you have underground utilities already nearby your home or to your home, you get a credit for that in the assessment. But anyway, it's worked out, just to give you an example, on Everglades Island, the average assessment cost was about $12,475 per parcel, average. And we do this through internal financing. The internal financing is done where we charge you our opportunity cost for having loaned the money to the project, and so the interest that we lose is the interest that we charge you. And just as an example, Everglades Island, their interest rate for year number 1 was 1.5%, which is pretty good. So what we have is a neighborhood program based upon assessments, and we utilize a petition. So we depend heavily today on what we call a champion for undergrounding. Like I said earlier, people call me, they'll come to the office, they'll come to me at a meeting, and they say, I want my neighborhood undergrounded. We provide them with a petition, and they're the champion, and they and their other neighbors, they go around and they seek the petition signatures, and when they get 67%, we can do the work. And so we've done Via Fontana, and we just recently completed Everglades Island. The neighborhood program, though, has some problems to it, pros and cons that I'll get into. And we would like to segue to a different process based upon some of the interest that we've received of late by virtue of projects on Nightingale and La Puerta and on East Inlet Drive. But let me just tell you a little bit about the work, because I know I will get questions about the construction process. The first thing that we do, obviously, is hire a consulting engineer who does the design. And you might say to yourself, well, why do you have to do a design? You have the utility companies. Well, there's two options, basically, in the construction process. One, you can have the utilities do all of the work. By all of the work, we mean do the conduit through the street system up to your house and do the lines that connect to your house. Or you can do it another way. The town or a third party will do the conduit that will be throughout to do the distribution of the system. And then the utilities will do certain parts of the work, such as run the lines or connect it to each individual home. Every time we've done it, it's cheaper if the town does the conduit itself and the utilities do their part. For example, a lot of the jobs that FPL does are only authorized to be done by union employees, so they don't let third parties do that. They only let the unions do it, which ups the cost, by the way. So let me say that the problem with the neighborhood approach, if you step back for a moment and think about it from the town's perspective, particularly from the perspective of the Public Works Department, is that it can interfere with the planned, organized process of updating infrastructure throughout the community. So you can imagine an operation like Public Works. They have a 5-year capital improvement program. Everything is planned out, where they're going to do what. There are ups and downs to that based on things that happen from time to time. But all of a sudden, we're going to do a neighborhood and convert it to underground. And the proper and prudent thing to do at that time is to do all of the other infrastructure work that you want at that same time. Well, that means they have to divert resources and time to something that wasn't in the 5-year capital program. So it's problematic from a workflow, work process point of view if neighborhoods just come here, there, wherever, when you're trying to do the infrastructure for an entire town. What happened of late was we had 2 neighborhood projects on the north end of town. East Inlet Drive at the very northern end, and Nightingale and La Puerta Way wanted to convert. They did the petition, the whole 9 yards. And we've done the engineering contracts for everybody to get started on their part of the work. And suddenly, I guess through word of mouth or what, I'm not sure, I just started receiving lots of phone calls and questions about what do we have to do to get our neighborhood, our block, our street done. And so I went to the director of Public Works in a meeting one day and say, hey, I'm being bombarded. Do we want to continue doing this the same way? And the answer was, if we can find a better way, let's do it. And what we'd like to do is segue to what we call the programmatic approach. What we'd like to do, based on the interest that's been expressed, is we would like to convert the north end of the island, pretty much north of the Palm Beach Country Club, into at least 2 projects to convert all of the utilities underground. To meet to receive the 25% discount from FPL to facilitate storm response and so forth, we would do from the inlet to Ocean Terrace, and that would be sufficient to receive the 25% discount. And then we would do from Ocean Terrace to List Road, I think it is, and that also would be eligible for the 25% discount. Meanwhile, I've received calls from people even further south saying they want to do their neighborhood too. So we can do it, and we'd be happy to, but this is the preferred way we'd like to do it. Now, I mentioned earlier we use a petition, and the petition works out fine and dandy for 1 block or 2 streets, but when you're doing you know, 3 miles of utility lines. A paper petition is a very cumbersome and inefficient way to go about gauging the interest of the people. So I've been working with the Ordinance, Rules, and Standards Committee of the Town Council to come up with, Mr. Diamond is here, the chair, come up with a way to make it efficient so we can hear whether or not 67% of the people want to do it. So I haven't gone back to them with my proposal yet, but I believe it has to be done by mail. There needs to be 1 vote per property, not voter registration, but 1 vote per property. We have to figure out a way where people that are for or against can't tilt the game, so to speak, that there's no counterfeiting of ballots or anything like that, because it has happened in other communities, I can tell you. And then if we are able, if it doesn't pass, we would still be able to say and look at a map and say, well, you know what? This part of the island does want to do it. So let's just focus on that and do them instead. But the way it is right now, we need a whole new petition process in order to do large sections of land throughout the community. One of the upsides to doing large portions of the community is we cannot use the internal financing plan because the cost of those projects exceeds the town's ability to fund them internally. Each project that I mentioned earlier for the north end would be about $5 million apiece. Just while I think of it, we estimate that undergrounding is going to run between $12,000 and $18,000 per parcel. Every neighborhood and every street is different, but when we do internal financing, although it has a very, very attractive interest rate, we can only use a 10-year term to pay back. But if we go to the bigger dollar numbers, we can go up to 30-year financing. I ran the numbers using the worst-case scenario of about $18,000. And for over 30 years, it's about $600 per year per parcel at the $18,000 number. Now, in 30 years, you know, the average American, and I'm not suggesting you're average, but the average American, every 7 years, they'll move to another house. So in 30 years, you could have 4 generations of ownership, and you won't end up paying. Because in the assessment program, when you sell the home, the unpaid portion rolls over to the annual tax bill of that new owner, and it's paid off over time, over 30 years. Just to show you, in working with the town's financial advisors, if we did bond financing for 30 years, the interest rate is 5.5% currently, which is pretty good considering it's not full faith and credit of the town of Palm Beach. It's only based upon a pledge to assess. So that's a very good interest rate. If you did 15, it's 3.9, 20 is 4.5, and so forth. But the point being is that we can access different financing if we go with the programmatic program. Make sure I've touched on everything. I think I've hit everything that I wanted to. I don't want to bore you to death with the details of construction. Some of you may ask that in the Q&A, but I think what I'll do now is stop and let you ask any questions, because I'm sure there's oodles of questions, and some of you have probably gone through it before, but just let me say this one last thing. You know, the demand for electricity, in my opinion, is not really going to go down. It's only going to go up. And if you can think and imagine devices and systems and programs that you can have in your home in the future, such as medical devices that are in contact with the hospital or your doctor, and they're based on electricity and power, the demand for power in this country, at least, well, let's say in this community, is only going to go up. And I think, based on all the work that I've done these last 11 or so years, is we're actually operating on an antiquated system, an antiquated distribution system in this town that's highly unreliable by virtue of the environment that we're in, with the growth and the undergrowth and the landscaping. We heard from FPL this Tuesday at the town council meeting, and just with a little rainstorm, the palm fronds blow into the lines, and you get these flutters, and people are just aggravated by it. And with the fact that you're a barrier island, you really ought to be long-term thinking about being underground utilities. It's the best, most secure way to provide it. Now, long-term, in order to get maximum reliability, we've got to, if we are ever successful in doing the entire island, we need to move to the mainland, and from the substation to the lake, we need to harden every one of those overground facilities, and you'll have the maximum reliability that you will ever get anywhere in Florida if you do that, plus underground the entire town. And we can do it if you want to, and you sign these petitions and so forth, but you have to tell us, and then we will go and do it. So with that, let me answer any questions that anybody may have.
The question that people always ask in these sorts of things, they say, well, we did it in our street.
Start again.
Testing, 1, 2.
One of the questions people always ask, so after you've done it, we've done it in our street, and we had a storm the next day, and all our lights went out. And then they come back and they find out, well, that's an FP&L problem that was 5 miles away. And we get, we get through those trunk lines and those sub-trunk lines. So how can you work with FP&L so that while things like you're describing are happening, they are also upgrading at the same proportion? You could do the whole north end right now and still have power outages all the time because of something that happened 8 miles away.
Correct. That's right. There's two things that we can do today with FP&L, and that is, number one, they have a fairly aggressive hardening program. Okay, what does that mean? They do, well, engineers can explain it better than I can, but basically they make them more storm secure than they would be otherwise. They need to do that. They're doing that in places like from substations to government facilities, substation to hospitals, substations to this, that, and the other. We need to make sure that they ultimately harden from the substation to Lake Worth, where we have subaqueous crossings coming over to the island, providing the power through the distribution system. They have, by law, a vegetation management program that they utilize. Seems like they seem to be fearful in Palm Beach of using the power that they really have for vegetation management. And this latest go-around of power outages that we've had, we've told them that we are here to help them, that we have rules, ordinances on our books that say if you have got a hedge or a tree or whatnot that's interfering with the overhead distribution system, that's a code violation, and you're going to be required, and we've already had some people go before the code enforcement board, you're going to be required to trim that and make sure that it does not interfere. They have throughout their entire distribution system, they have the power to go in and clear completely their easement areas, but they do not do it, probably partially for cost, but they don't want to upset the customers. They need to understand, I think that most rational people who are experiencing brownouts and power outages would rather somebody have a tree trimmed than to have to live with that. And so if we just continue to give them that message, I think that ultimately they will do that and keep that system maintained in that fashion. Other questions? I saw one. Yes, sir.
I live up on South County. I'm sorry. I live up on South County, and about 3 weeks ago, it rained like 5 days in a row. We had little sprinkles, nothing like last week. just tiny little sprinkles. Electricity went out each and every single time. Not only at my house, but all my neighbors, because I'm friendly with my neighbors. We went out and spoke to the PP&L people, not PP&L, sorry. I'm from Pennsylvania. The Florida Power and Light. And they said the conductors are old on the poles, and they should be replaced. Well, they know what has to be done. Why can't you make them do it? If they know the problem is the fact that conductors are old, and every time it rains, they go out.
Well, when we do deal with them on the maintenance of their system, they usually respond that it meets all of the requirements of the Public Service Commission, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some of that you experience, you live between Worth Avenue and South Ocean Boulevard on South County Road, is it?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that place, that area was particularly hit hard because of a breaker switch problem that actually was over at the substation on Belvedere, off Belvedere Road in West Palm Beach. But they do regular checking of the overhead facilities using thermal vision to identify hot spots, which they then put on a work list to repair. And they do field inspections when we have these problems. So there was one weekend where there was over 100 outages from that one breaker switch over the 2-day weekend. So it's not easy for us to say, hey, utility company, this is not sufficient or it's not proper maintenance. That's not our bailiwick, but we do and can file complaints, and we do monitor them and request them to tell us their reliability reports if we need them. Any other questions?
Did they fix that breaker on Belvedere?
Yes, they did. The lady with the green sweater.
Let me ask this question. Given what you've just described and your road trip up to Lost Tree, could you share the experience of Lost Tree, which has the underground, but may experience the 8-mile-away issues during the storms, recent storms and the hurricanes back in the early 2000s?
Well, it's been a while since we had communications with Lost Tree, but my recollection is that they're very pleased with their underground system, as is Jupiter Island, which converted the entire town. Jupiter Inlet Colony has converted, and I think Danny Brannon is in the process of converting all of Gulf Stream to underground service. I don't remember them complaining about any outages, but that doesn't mean to say that they are immune. They could get outages even though they have a lovely community that has underground utilities. Yes, ma'am.
If there is an outage and you have underground, does that mean that they have to dig up all of the line, or are there computers, are there chips or whatever that are installed that they know where the outage is?
Well, this is the way it's described generally to the public, that if you have underground utilities and there's a problem, it usually takes longer to identify where the problem is, but you have fewer of those types of situations. They have equipment, don't they, Danny, that they can go and point where they know where the underground was. They can determine it with some types of equipment that they have, where the problem is, so they don't always have to dig up every line or the entire line or portions. Did you want to add anything, Danny?
Yeah. Generally speaking, when you have the underground system and you have a loop-type system, and they're able to switch cables around and get service restored, an overhead system is typically a radial system. They do not have to replace the cables. They can merely switch them out and come back another day and pull a new cable in. And concerning about the 8-mile-away problem, when we did Jupiter Island, we became very aware of these 8-mile-away feeder problems. The southern feeder to Jupiter Island was very reliable. The northern feeder had problems. We worked with FPL, and FPL was very cooperative and willing to work with us, and we ended up putting some automatic switches on the mainland where the power goes underground to feed the north end of the island. And now if that feeder goes out, it automatically throws the whole north end of the island over to an alternate feeder. So FPL is willing to work with us to make these systems better.
Yes, Mr. Small.
I live on East Inlet, and as you indicated, we've already gone through the process of getting the approvals. We've had all the petitions approved. The town council has approved us. I perceive that now we may experience a delay as a result of this new concept of including the whole north end, and if so, can you define for us how much of a delay we're talking about?
Yes. There won't be a delay. We are still proceeding full speed ahead with your project and Nightingale La Puerta. The timing issue related to that is if we do your job before we finish or start the bigger job, if we have a bigger job, will we be able to roll you in to get the 25% discount and to get the longer-term financing that's available through that program? So your basic question is, would you be delayed? No. But we want to ideally, we'd love for you to be able to have access to the 25% discount and to have the alternative financing available to you if you choose to do that. So timing is of some concern, but we're not going to hold you up because we have a bigger project. Yes, sir.
Do I understand you correctly that the 127 apartments in my condominium building would have a total of 1 vote?
No, each condominium would have a separate vote.
I see. When you say property, you're referring not to the property of the condominium, but the property of each apartment.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Diamond.
Yeah, Tom, there's some discussion that there may be a problem with the reconstruction of the bridge, the North Bridge, so that we can keep the exit evacuation routes open. How does that figure in with the big job that we'd like to do in the North End?
Well, it has the potential to be a big problem. What we would do is, if we get the the sufficient amount of petition signatures to do those projects, we would go to design, and I believe, Mazi, you said that it would take about a year or two to do the entire design alone. So, and if the bridge were not open when we finished design, we would not start construction until the bridge opened. So it's probably going to work out okay.
You wouldn't rely on the old bridge?
No, we wouldn't do that. We wouldn't. Paul would kill me if we tried to do an underground project that big with only, with a loss of a bridge. Yes. Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
We live on Ibis Isle, so it's kind of similar to.
Talk up, please.
Sorry. We live on Ibis Isle, so it's similar to Everglades. I was just curious how long the project took on Everglades.
Everglades took 18 months, maybe, total, about 18. Yeah. Now, let me explain that so that you don't are overly fearful. The biggest problem that we have when we do undergrounding is not the work that we do, it's the coordination of the 3 utilities involved. The 3 are FPL, AT&T, and Comcast. We can tell them we need you to be here on February 1st, but if they've got an outage, they're not coming. And they have multiple obligations and responsibilities, but that's our biggest problem. And so we had some problems in that regard relative to that project. Ibis Isle, by the way, I believe, because it's an island, it would be eligible for the 25% too. Would be eligible, Ibis Isle, I'm pretty sure, based on the fact that because Everglades Island was an island, it received the 25%. Other questions? Yes, ma'am?
Is there any future possibility of the cable and phone lines being buried as well?
Oh, yes. We do all of that simultaneously. Yes, absolutely. All of it. Anything else? Oh, more back here. Yes, sir.
What happens to, considering the flooding we got the other day, what happens in those situations to the underground lines?
I'm going to let one of these engineers talk about it. They weren't affected on Everglades Island at all by virtue of water or rising water.
These, this equipment, transformers are stainless steel now that we're buying for the barrier islands, or FPL's buying for the barrier islands. The switches that we're using for the feeders that sit on the ground are submersible. They actually are sealed up, gas operated. So we've had almost no problems with flooding. We've had transformers that were 3/4 underwater and still providing service to the houses. The issues with things going out of service with the kind of equipment we're putting in today is extremely remote.
You'll leave us your cell number so we can call.
Oh, any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm also from Ibis Isle. Your response to the lady's inquiry, I assume that this larger project that you have, the north end here, has nothing to do with being still able to go forward with a smaller project?
That's correct.
And the second thing is another answer to the question, too, about condominium. In Ibis Isle, there are both condominiums and homeowners.
Yes, sir.
If each condominium owner is counted, so, and a condominium project may have 20 in each one or 5 in each one, is it possible to have it broken down so that the owners of the homes get their project done, or can have a project getting to 60 to 70%, whereas it might be much more difficult to get the condo, if they're included each one, getting their 60 to 70%.
Well, we can't, I'm sorry.
I said, isn't the service on Ibis Isle already buried in the condo area?
That's what I thought.
Yeah, I think it is. They've already got it buried.
So we
It's
can't.
only buried?
It's buried on the condo side.
Oh, it's already buried in the condo area?
I think so.
Oh, so for the homeowners, they would just need their 60 to
Then we would
70%.
focus on the area that has overhead, which would be the single-family homes.
Sorry to take that
No,
extra time.
that's okay. Question in the back. Yes, sir.
You mentioned that a given neighborhood might decide if 2/3 of the property owners there voted for the petition to go ahead with this. What is the definition of a neighborhood, and who decides that? Is it a standardized definition or ad hoc, case by case, or what?
It's ad hoc, case by case. It's usually at least a block. A block, if you look at it from a bird's eye view, a block in the case of Nightingale and La Puerta, it's not you and the neighbors across the street, it's you and the neighbors behind you. And one other thing I wanted to make a point about that I didn't touch on, FPL's service standard for underground utilities is to service you from the front yard, not the rear yard. Many of you today have service from your rear yard easement. So the power would come out to the street, and it would then serve you near the right-of-way. And we need to put transformers out by the edge of the road, usually at the corner of a property. Not every property. Depends on the demand in the neighborhood, how many transformers are needed. But the service standard is from the front, and the reason for that is so they can have access to that transformer when it needs to be maintained or repaired or replaced.
We saw that on the tour.
Yes.
At Phipps Estates, and you can't, they hide those things.
We hide them, yes. Absolutely. They're hidden by landscaping. Yes, ma'am.
Excuse me, but what about the telephone and the cable is all coming from the rear of the property? And if you have new construction like I do, I have buried everything from the rear of the property in a conduit into the home. So now I'm going to have something else buried in the front? It doesn't seem to make common sense.
Well, that's that's what you need to take into account if you're asked to sign a petition. We're going
But
to
from a
put,
cost perspective, that doesn't seem to make common sense.
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm an accountant.
because your utilities are underground, you're going to have a lesser assessment to begin with based on the methodology. But yes, new conduit would come in from the street to the house, and not from the rear.
Different from the telephone and the cable and everything existing.
No, all three would come from the front.
But you'd rewire what's there for the telephone and the cable.
That's correct.
Okay,
All of
thank
it.
you.
The easement can be eliminated if all of the facilities are removed from that easement. So that typically 5-foot easement back there, 2 lots abutting, 2.5 here, 2.5 there, you can abandon it and you can move your property. It's your property, but you can now actually utilize it as opposed to having that easement back there. And there's a jungle that usually grows in that area. Yes, sir.
As a matter of safety, I remember from the hurricanes that a large problem was all of the lines that went down on North County going through the north of Wells there. And I'm wondering why this undergrounding doesn't start off with undergrounding the length of County Road, as opposed to the neighborhoods.
Are you talking about North County Road?
Yeah,
Yes.
North County Road, because that's where where there's a lot of wires and,
Yes.
and potential problems.
Well-
I've seen a truck or a car that ran into one of them and knocked it over.
Yes, there's actually a project right now to convert all of those to underground based on most of the property owners on the east side of North County are desirous of burying them, but we think it's prudent that we also check that area and its residents to the west, the side streets we call them, to see if they too want to participate, because it makes more sense to do the entire area than just those on one side of that street. So, but that's in the works right now as a potential project. Question? Oh, yes, ma'am.
Thank you for bringing all this to our attention. But I live on High Mount Road, and when Gottfried built his house about 20 years ago, he buried the lines on the west side of the street. I'm on the east side of the street. Does that mean you can take the wires from the west side of the street and just put them over on my property, or do I have to bring them from the back of the house to the front?
We did exactly what you're talking about in about, 17 places on Everglades Island. The line was on one side. We did a horizontal directional drilling, put in conduit, and ran it to the south side of the street. So you would still end up being serviced from the front yard, but we would not be necessarily running the line in a linear fashion along your frontage, but rather we may come from across the street.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Question in the very back?
What about the streets that have the alleys? Because our electric comes from the alleys.
Yes. Well, you can. Danny tells me you can be in an alley. That's what's called like I think a double. What is it called? Double frontage lot. If the alley is sufficient to allow for vehicular access, then it can be construed as a double frontage lot, and then you may be able to receive your power from the rear because FPL could continue to service that transformer from the rear. We'd have to look at it on a case-by-case basis with FPL's input, but we're working on one of those right now on Island Road. Well, actually, the residents live on El Bravo Way, and they want utilities, and we're going to try to service them from the rear off of Island Road. So I think it can be done. Yes. Okay, a couple more questions, and then we're going to have to close it. Yes, sir.
I just want to say that I live on Everglades Island. There was a lot of aggravation all summer long having that work done. Boy, the end result was great. So it's worth going through it.
Oh, thank you. Apologize for all that aggravation. Last question. That is it. ladies, oh, yes, sir.
Do you have to give an easement in the front of the property?
Sometimes, it depends. Usually what we do is we have the ability to put the underground line in the right-of-way, and then if we're able to do that, the only place we need easements is where we put the transformers. That's it. Well,
Tom, on behalf
yes.
of the Civic Association, we'd like to thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you for answering this.